We're going to go over the endangered animal notes for honor zoology. So, endangered species are a type of organism that is threatened by extinction. We're going to focus, of course, just on animals because this is zoology, but technically you can also have endangered species of plants. So there's two main reasons that animals can become extinct. There can either be a loss of habitat or loss of genetic variation. So loss of habitat means that obviously it's got no place to live, and this can occur naturally, like what happened to the dinosaurs, or it can be caused by human activity. So developments for housing, industries, and agriculture reduces the habitat of a lot of native organisms. Habitat loss is one of the leading known causes of population decline of animals. Right? For genetic variation, this is the diversity found within a species. So genetic variation allows a species to adapt to changes in the environment. The more variation is, the more likely they are to survive. All right. So the loss of genetic variation can occur naturally, or it can be caused by human activity that causes, like the human activity causes leads to a loss of genetic variation, such as overhunting or overfishing, have reduced the population of a lot of animals. So if we kill off a lot of the population, we're reducing like the variation within that population, which can cause genetic variation to decrease within the species. All right. So there's what's called a red list. This was by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or the IUCN, and they keep a red list of threatened species. The red list defines the severity and the specific causes of a species threat to extinction. The red list has 7 levels of conservation. There are 2 levels that are considered not threatened, which would be animals of least concern or near threatened. There's the most threatened, which are classified either as vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered, so they get more and more severe. And then there's, of course, extinct species. And there's 2 levels of extinct. There's extinct in the wild and then just straight up extinct. All right. So classifying a species as endangered has to do with its range and its habitat, as well as its actual population. A species can be of least concern in one area of the world and endangered in another part of the world. Over on this graphic, you can kind of see this graphic up top is what we'll commonly see throughout the year or the semester as we research different animals, and they'll highlight one of these circles for ours, for the animal that you're researching rather, and then you can see the second half of it shows you how the extinction risk increases as it goes up from least concern up to extinct. So now we're going to break down each of those categories. So of least concern is the lowest level of conservation. A species of least concern is one that has a widespread and abundant population, such as cats and dogs, pigeons, houseflies. All of these things, or all of these animals rather, are very populated. They're at no risk of going extinct anytime soon. Right. For near threatened, these are considered likely to qualify for a threatened category in the near future. A bull shark is an example of this. They're not technically threatened yet, but they're trending towards being there soon if nothing changes, or nothing good changes rather. All right. So then within the 3 threatened categories, there's 5 factors that scientists look at, or 5 type criteria rather, when they're designating where the species belongs within the list. So the 5 things they'll look at is 1, the population reduction rate. This is the decline, which is measured over 10 years or 3 generations of the species, whichever of those is longer. The second thing they'll look at is geographic range, which within that they'll look at the extent of occurrence, which is the smallest area that could contain all sites of a species population. And then they'll look at the area occupancy, where a specific population of that species resides. This area is often a breeding or nesting site within their range. Right. The third thing they'll look at is population size, which is simply how big they are. The fourth thing is the population restrictions, which is the combination of the population, like the size of the population, and the area they occupy. And then the 5th thing is the probability of extinction. Scientists will use some formulas to calculate the chances of a species can survive without any human protection in the wild. Threatened categories have different thresholds for these categories. As the population range of the species decreases, the species becomes more threatened. Right? So the first level of threatened is a vulnerable species. So for the population reduction rate, it's got to decline between 30 and 50%. depending on if the cause is known. So 50% if they know the cause, 30% decrease if they don't know why the population is being reduced, like is dying off. For the geographic range, they extent of where they occur is less than 20,000 square miles, or sorry, 20,000 square kilometers, and then the area occupancy is less than 2,000 square kilometers. The population has to be fewer than 10,000 mature individuals that are to be vulnerable, and then less than 1,000 mature individuals or an area of occupancy less than 20 square kilometers is their population restriction. For the probability of extinction in the wild is at least 10% within 100 years. So one example of where this is found is a snaggletooth shark. It's found in the tropical coastal waters of India and as well as the Pacific Ocean. Its area of occupancy is enormous from Southeast Africa to the Philippines and from China to Australia. So it's got a wide range. However, the snaggletooth shark is a vulnerable species because of a severe population reduction rate. Its population has fallen more than 10% over 10 years, and the number of sharks is declining due to fisheries, especially in the Java Sea and the Gulf of Thailand. The snaggletooth shark's flesh, fins, and liver are considered high quality foods, and they're sold in commercial fish markets as well as restaurants. So all of that has put it as listed it as a vulnerable species. All right, the next category is endangered species, which is what we commonly think of when you're talking about things going extinct. You're like, it's endangered. So to be endangered, you have a population reduction rate that's declined between 50 and 70%. 70% if we know the cause, 50% if you don't know the cause. The geographic range has to be less than 5,000 square kilometers, and the area of occupancy has to be less than 500 square kilometers. The population size needs to be less than 2,500 mature individuals, and the population restriction has to be less than 250 mature individuals. And when the species population is this low, the area occupancy isn't actually considered for the population restriction. The probability of extinction in the wild is at least 20% within 20 years or 5 generations based on the scientists' formulas that they use, and whichever is longer. An example of of an animal that is endangered is the Siberian sturgeon, which is pictured here. It's a large fish found in rivers and lakes throughout the Siberian region of Russia. The Siberian sturgeon is an endangered species because its total population has declined between 50 and 80% during the past 60 years, which is 3 generations of the sturgeon. Overfishing, poaching, and dam construction have caused this decline. Pollution from mining activities has also contributed abnormalities to the sturgeon's reproductive systems. So that has caused it to be listed as an endangered species. All right. Next up, we have a critically endangered species, so it's next level, and these are at high risk of becoming extinct. So the population reduction rate has declined between 80 and 90%. 90% if the causes of the decline is known, and 80% of the decline is not known. The geographic range, the extent of occupancy is less than 100 square kilometers, and the area of occupancy is less than 10 square kilometers. The population size has to be less than 250 individuals, and the population restriction is less than 50 mature individuals. And when the species population is this low, just like the endangered species, the area occupancy is not considered. The probability of extinction in the wild for critically endangered species has to be at least 50% within the next 10 years or 3 generations of the species, whichever is longer. An example of a critically endangered species is the Trans-Caucasian race runner, which you see pictured here. It's a lizard found in the Armenian Plateau located in Armenia, Azerbaijan, Iran, and Turkey. It's a critically endangered species because of a huge population decline that's estimated at more than 80% during the past 10 years. Threats to the species include salination, or the increase of saltiness of the soil. Fertilizers used for agricultural development seep into the soil, increasing its saltiness. The race runners live in and among the rocks and the soil and cannot adapt to the increased salt in their food and their shelter. The race runners also losing habitat as people create trash dumps on their area of occupancy, which this has caused them to become a critically endangered species. Right. Moving on to extinct animals. So extinct in the wild is when a species is extinct in the wild when it only survives in captivity or as a population well outside of its established range. A species may be listed as extinct in the wild only after years of surveys have failed to record an individual in its native or expected habitat. An example of a species that's extinct in the wild is the black soft-shelled turtle. It's a freshwater turtle that only exists in one man-made pond pond, at the Bazid Bostami shrine near uh, Chittagong, Bangladesh. I hope I said that correctly. I apologize if I did not. Um, the 150 to 300 turtles that live at the pond rely entirely on humans for food. Until the year 2000, the black soft-shelled turtles lived throughout the wetlands of the Brahmaputra, I know that's pronounced incorrectly, river, feeding mostly on freshwater fish. Unlike other animals that are extinct in the wild, the black soft-shelled turtles are not found in many zoos. The shrine's caretakers do not allow anyone, including scientists, to take the turtles. The reptiles are considered to be descendants of the people who were miraculously turned into turtles by the saint during the 13th century. And then for extinct species, these are of course extinct where there's no reasonable doubt that the last remaining individuals of that species has died. An example of an extinct species is the Cuban macaw. The Cuban macaw was a tropical parrot native to Cuba and a small Cuban island. Hunting and collecting the birds for pets led to the bird's extinction. The last specimen of the Cuban macaw was collected in 1864. Right. So we have done as a country some things to try and help save species from going extinct, such as the Endangered Species Act. Congress passed the Endangered Species Act, or abbreviated ESA, in 1973. There, I believe, has been some revisions to this over time, but the purpose of it is to protect and recover imperiled species and the ecosystems upon which they depend. Under this law, species may be listed as either endangered or threatened. Endangered meaning a species is in danger of extinction throughout all or a significant portion of its range, and threatened means the species is likely to become endangered within the foreseeable future. So they don't quite classify all the levels we just talked about, they focus on the main two. Um, all species of plants and animals, except for pest insects, are eligible for listing as an endangered or threatened. For the purposes of the ESA, Congress defines a species to include subspecies, varieties, and for vertebrates, distinct population segments. So, thankfully, mosquitoes won't ever end up as an endangered or threatened species because they are a pest insect, as well as ants and things like that. But otherwise, any animal and plant is eligible to be listed and protected under the Endangered Species Act. Well, that is it for these set of notes. If you have any questions, please reach out.